and you may proceed.
All right, everybody. With this, I believe, all of the judges are muted besides myself. My name is Judge Holder. We're calling to the matter of Estate of Genesis Petrillo versus Harper Martini in Peonia Estates. At this time, may we please do introductions?
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. My name is Sarah Paul, and along with my co-counsel, Clay Owens.
Evening, Your Honor.
And Michael Lee.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Will represent the plaintiff in today's case, the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
All right, and from defense, introductions, if you please.
Yes, Your Honor. Good evening. My name is Fernando Izquierdo, and I'm joined alongside my co-counsel, Mr. Zachary Parada.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Who will be delivering our opening statement, and Miss Abigail Branham,
Good evening, Your Honor.
who will be delivering our closing argument. And today, the defense represents Harper Martini. Miss Martini, if you will.
Good evening, Your Honor.
Hello to everybody. All right, are there any pre-trial matters?
Your Honor, the plaintiff has a few pretrial matters. First,
When you're ready.
yes, Your Honor. First, we ask the court to invoke Rule 615 and constructively separate all witnesses except for party representatives. Today, Your Honor, the plaintiff has no party representative.
Defense, do you have any objections to that?
No, Your Honor. We would just like to note that Harper Martini has been designated as our party representative. She's the defendant on trial.
Certainly. All witnesses are constructively sequestered, although Miss Martini may remain in the room.
Given the unique format of today's trial, we ask Your Honor's permission to display evidence on the screen before it's been admitted for authentication by the witness, with, of course, the understanding that we're doing so constructively outside the presence of the jury.
The defense, do you have any objection to that?
None, Your Honor.
Certainly. So what's going to happen is we will constructively show evidence to the attorneys and the witness separate from the jury. However, we're not going to dismiss anybody. Make sure to have something clearly moved onto the record, and I will let you all know if it is now in front of the jury.
Finally, Your Honor, we'd like to note that exhibits pre-marked 1 through 10 have been stipulated as admitted by both parties.
Is that your understanding, defense?
Yes, Your Honor, it is.
And are these exhibits usable at any time or after closings?
Anytime, Your Honor.
Certainly. You may enter that evidence.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed.
Any pretrial matters from defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense seeks to motion for 603, Rule 603, the constructive swearing in of all witnesses.
All right, all witnesses will be pre-sworn.
And Your Honor, it's the defense's intention throughout today's trial to stand for statements and cross-examinations, but we also intend to sit during direct examinations. Is that all right with Your Honor? Of course, we mean no disrespect.
Given the unique format, I will not take offense to anybody sitting. While this is a presentation-based competition, points should not be given or taken for someone sitting or standing, both to recognize the unique situation we are in and the able-bodiedness of our competitors. Out of that respect, obviously no one will be penalized for sitting.
Yes, Your Honor. And should an objection be sustained, should we move to strike or assume that testimony is stricken?
Please ask to have things stricken.
Absolutely, Your Honor. And one more thing regarding the stipulations, the plaintiff has alleged and informed us prior to trial that they're pursuing a claim of battery, meaning that they have intended that Harper Martini put pesticides in a 2019 car of wine that was given to the decedent in today's case, Genesis Petrillo. We're willing to stipulate right now, if the plaintiff is as well, that Genesis Petrillo died from pesticide poisoning after drinking that 2019 car of wine. That's not going to be an issue for the defense today.
Okay, plaintiff, what say you?
We're absolutely fine with stipulating to that, Your Honor.
Okay, it is so stipulated that is it Mr. Petrillo in this matter?
Mr. Petrillo, Your Honor.
Mr. Petrillo will have been died due to pesticides. The jury will receive an instruction at the end of trial, constructively prior to closings. And with that, is there anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor, the defense is ready to proceed to opening statements.
Plaintiff, anything further?
Nothing further, Your Honor. We're ready to go as well.
Certainly. May the plaintiff opener, when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, Mr. Lee,
May I proceed?
you may.
May it please the court. She was out of time. She was out of options. Members of the jury, this is Genesis Petrillo. On June 8th of 2019, he was set to get married. After months of planning, he and Casey Soto were finally ready to share in the happiest day of their lives together. Their wedding rehearsal dinner was the night before, held at Peony Estates, a winery owned by the defendant, Harper Martini. Genesis was surrounded by his friends, his family. It was supposed to be a night of celebration. But within hours, Genesis was rushed to the hospital, comatose. His doctors tried everything they could, but his breathing just got slower and slower. And at 9:27 a.m., it stopped. Genesis was gone forever. And now you'll learn today that this tragedy wasn't the result of some freak accident. Because this story actually starts far earlier than June 7th. You see, as the wedding approached, there was one person who got closer and closer to losing everything she loved. That person was Harper Martini, Casey Soto's mother, and the defendant in today's case. Now, you'll learn today that the defendant hated Genesis. She argued with him, fought with him, complained about him, and what's worse, Genesis planned to move to Paris after the wedding. In one fell swoop, taking the defendant's only child away from her and destroying her dream that Casey would inherit the family business. The defendant did everything she could to stop that wedding, but nothing worked. She was running out of time and running out of options. And so, with nowhere left to turn, the defendant laced a bottle of wine with deadly pesticides and she gave it to Genesis. That's why we're here today, members of the jury. We brought a claim of battery against the defendant, Harper Martini. And to prove it, we had to show you that the defendant intentionally harmed Genesis Petrillo by poisoning that bottle of wine, and that was his cause of death. We have to show this by a preponderance of the evidence, simply meaning more likely than not. We'll meet this burden, members of the jury. We'll show you exactly how the defendant ran out of time and out of options. First, you'll hear from Casey Soto. She'll tell you about her fiance, about how her mother bitterly despised the man she loved, and how she tried for months to stop their wedding. You'll hear exactly what the defendant was willing to do from Devin Dzhokhar, the DJ who was hired for that weekend celebration. Ms. Dzhokhar will tell you how she saw an ultimatum the defendant wrote to Genesis, threatening to take him out of the picture the hard way. And you'll learn what happened after Genesis drank from that bottle of wine from Dr. Jimin Kwon. She'll tell you how she found pesticides in his stomach and how those pesticides caused his death. Members of the jury, today you'll meet a defendant who is desperate. You'll meet a woman who is just hours away from losing her only child for good. And when this defendant ran out of time, ran out of options, with the threat of losing everything she loved, members of the jury, she made a choice. She took her very last option, and she ended Genesis Petrillo's life. That's why, at the end of today's trial, we'll ask you to find Harper Martini liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Opening from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I proceed, can you see and hear me okay?
Absolutely. When you're ready.
Your Honor, Mr. Lee, members of the jury, may it please the court. The plaintiff just told you that Mr. Petrillo died because of pesticides in a bottle of wine. And we agree. But you'll learn today that this case, it isn't about what Harper Martini did. It's about what Peony Estates, the company that produced the wine that Mr. Petrillo drank, what they didn't do. Because you'll learn that Peony Estates was out of time and out of options because they were threatened with a flood of pests. And members of the jury, you'll learn when they were threatened with layoffs, that they skirted the rules intended to slow them down, and they put profits over people. But today, instead of seeking justice for the actions of Peony Estates, the plaintiff is charging Harper Martini with civil battery. And members of the jury, for you to find her liable of that, the plaintiff has to prove by a preponderance of the evidence that she acted with the intent to harm Mr. Petrillo and that her act was the direct and proximate cause of his death. And if they can't prove that each and every one of those elements were more likely than not, you're going to find Miss Martini not liable at the end of today's trial. And members of the jury, remember, the defense, we don't have that obligation. But we don't have to show you one piece of evidence or present a single witness, but you're going to hear from 3 of ours. And you'll learn that Peony Estates, they put profits over people. But remember, members of the jury, today's case, it's about intent. If the plaintiff can't prove the Harper Martini intended to hurt Mr. Petrillo, this case is over. And you'll hear from Harper Martini herself that she never intended to hurt anyone. In fact, you'll learn the only thing she intended to do in this case is make her daughter's wedding perfect. And you'll learn the lengths she went to make that wedding perfect from Blair Osborne, the wedding planner who also attended the wedding rehearsal dinner. You'll learn that Miss Martini spent tens of thousands of dollars and hours on this wedding, obsessing over every detail. But members of the jury, you're going to ask yourself, if Miss Martini didn't have a reason to stop this wedding from happening, why didn't it? Well, you'll learn that Miss Martini was so obsessed with perfecting this wedding that she left the hands of her business, Peony Estates, in the hands of Austin Lewis, the head winemaker. And when she did, she expected, trusted that Miss Lewis would follow the rules. But instead of doing that, she threatened her employees with layoffs so they cared more about what went into their pockets than what got into their wine. They sprayed pesticides in the same room as that bottle of Caro wine. And when they did that, members of the jury, they put profits over people, just like you and me. And at the end of today's trial, after hearing all that evidence, my co-counsel, Abby Branham, will come forward. She'll remind you that Peony Estates, they put profits over people. And she's going to ask you to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Before the plaintiff calls their first witness, is there anything that needs to be handled?
Nothing from the plaintiff, Your Honor.
All right. Mr. Lee, you may call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Casey Soto.
Why are you here today?
I'm here to talk about my fiance, Genesis Petrillo.
Your Honor, at this time, we're showing Exhibit 1. Ma'am, is this Genesis?
Yeah, that's him. I actually took that photo a few years ago while we were in Chicago. And, well, that was the day he told me he loved me for the first time.
How did you meet?
It's actually kind of a funny story. It was a few years ago and I was out with some friends and, I went up to the bar to grab a drink. And the next thing I know, I am tripping over my own 2 feet and the guy next to me has wine stained all over his shirt. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was like something you'd see out of a movie. But, Jen was real sweet about the whole thing. And well, from that moment, I knew this was the man I wanted to be with.
When was your wedding supposed to be?
The wedding was supposed to be on June 8th of 2019.
What was it like planning it?
Well, planning a wedding is already pretty stressful. But once my mom, Harper, got involved, that's when everything really just hit the fan. No matter what we were doing, she'd find some way to make it all about Genesis, saying that he wasn't good enough or that he didn't respect her. And all I could do was just sit there and watch the two of them go at it. It was a lot.
Where were you and Genesis planning on getting married?
Peony Estates. It's the winery and bed and breakfast that my mom owns. Jen and I were trying to save some money at the time. So when my mom offered to host the wedding, we just couldn't say no.
Why did you need to save money?
Genesis was offered the opportunity to own his own art gallery in Paris. He was so passionate and dedicated to his work that I couldn't let him pass up an opportunity like that. We were going to move to France right after the wedding.
Did your mom find out that you and Genesis were going to move to France?
Yeah, she eventually found out. About a month before the wedding, Genesis told her about the job offer and moving to France and that I was leaving. He told her everything.
What happened?
She just started screaming at us, saying this was terrible and we were terrible for leaving her. And then she just looks at Genesis and she says, you better reconsider your plans. Because I don't care if you stay or move off to France or end up 6 feet under. But Casey's staying here.
Did your mom say why she wanted you to stay in Midlands?
Yeah, she always talked about how she wanted me to take over the family business, Peony Estates. I kept telling her it's just not what I wanted, but that part never really seemed to matter.
Did you talk to your mom again about your plans to move to Paris?
Yeah, we talked about it at my rehearsal dinner on June 7th.
What was that night like?
Awful. That night was supposed to be about me and Genesis, and all my mom could do was blame Jen for everything. She kept going on saying that Genesis is the one behind all this and that I couldn't let him break up our family.
After your mom told you that you couldn't let Genesis break up your family, what happened next?
She stormed off and we went back to dinner. And then a little later, I think around 10 o'clock, my mom actually brought out a gift for Genesis. It was a bottle of car wine.
What did your mom do with that bottle?
Well, after she gave a toast to the two of us, she poured a glass for Jen. He was real sweet about the whole thing and accepted the gift. And I remember feeling so relieved because just for a second, it really seemed like they were getting along.
Did you see who drank from that bottle of wine?
Yeah, I did. I only saw Genesis drink from it.
So what did you do next?
Well, it was getting pretty late and my feet were killing me. So I went to go find Genesis to say goodnight.
Did you talk to him?
Yeah, I did. And he told me he was going to stay up, talk to his groomsmen. So he kisses me and he tells me he'll see me at the altar. So I went to bed.
What happened in the morning?
Well, the next morning I'm getting ready and I remember being so nervous because I kept rehearsing my vows over and over again in my head, but then my mom comes in and she tells me they can't find Genesis. And, at first I wasn't really worried because he'd been up pretty late talking to Angel and he had a really bad habit of sleeping through his alarms.
Did you say anything to your mom?
Yeah, I told her not to worry. that Genesis would be there. So she left, and I started doing my hair.
What happened next?
About 30 minutes later, my friend Angel comes running in, and she's shaking and pale, and I know that something's wrong.
What did Angel tell you?
She tells me that Genesis is in a coma. And at first I really thought it was a bad joke, so I asked her again, and again she says, Genesis is in a coma.
What did you do?
I don't think it even really registered. I just remember running to the car, trying not to trip over my wedding dress because I had to get to Jen.
Did you get to see him?
No.
What happened?
When I got to the hospital, the doctor found me, and he just looks at me, and I knew.
What do you mean?
We were too late. Jen was gone.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Soto. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
All right, Mr. Lee. Mr. Perota, do you have any cross-examination for this witness?
Yes, I do, Your Honor. Before I begin, Ms. Soto, can you see and hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Good evening, Ms. Soto.
Hi.
I just have a couple questions for you, okay?
All right.
I understand if this is difficult for you, so if you need a break at any point, just let me know, okay?
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Okay. Now, Harper Martini is your mom, right?
She is.
And growing up, you always thought she really cared about you.
She did, she tried.
You've always thought she wanted nothing but the best for you.
She was well-intentioned, but moms, they sometimes take it too far.
Says yes to my question, you always thought she wanted the best for you.
I did.
In fact, she offered to host your wedding.
Yes, she did.
And then she paid for $22,000 of it.
That's right.
And Miss Soto, after that, she told you that she was going to publicize that wedding.
Yes, she did.
She told you that she hoped the publicity would benefit her business.
Yeah, that's right.
And she said she was going to make any issues go away that would possibly hurt her business's reputation, right?
Yeah, that's what she said.
Now I want to talk about what happened at the wedding rehearsal dinner, okay?
All right.
When you got there, people started making toasts to you and Jen, right?
Yeah, a few of our friends.
Harper Martini, your mom, was one of those people.
Yeah, she eventually gave a toast to the two of us. It was really sweet.
And in that toast, she brought Genesis forward.
Yeah, that's right.
She took a microphone.
She did.
She did it in front of everyone there.
That's right. She gave the toast right in front of us.
And she made a big show of the whole thing.
Yeah, and I really thought it was sweet. I thought she was finally doing a nice thing.
And like you said, she gave him a bottle of Cara wine.
Yeah, that's right. She even poured him a glass herself.
Now, I like to project Exhibit 2B, Your Honor. It's been pre-admitted pursuant to Stipulation 3.
My understanding, it's admitted, so you may show it, and you may show it to the jury as well.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Soto, this is the label that was on that bottle of wine, right?
Yeah, it looks like it.
It says it's a 2019 Cara wine, right?
Yeah, that's what the label says.
Now, your mom, she said she was planning on releasing Cara wine to the public just after your wedding.
Yeah, she was.
And to be clear for the members of this jury, that label advertises her company.
Yeah, it does all their wine.
And she didn't give you that bottle in secret, did she?
No, like I said, she gave it right to Genesis.
And I want to talk about what happened after that.
All
Genesis
right.
brought it back to your table, okay?
He did.
He poured an additional 2 glasses.
Yeah, I'm sure he poured a glass or 2 more.
But you don't know who those glasses were for.
No, I really only saw Genesis drink it.
But I want to be clear about what you didn't see. You never saw your mom put any pesticides into that bottle of wine, did you know?
No, of course not.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Petrora. Mr. Lee, any redirect?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that the witness be excused.
Okay, Ms. Soto, thank you for your time. You may be excused.
Thank you.
Alrighty, plaintiff, you may call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Devin Dzhokhar. May we proceed?
All right, you may proceed.
Good evening. Can you introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Devin Dzhokhar.
What do you do for a living, Miss Dzhokhar?
What do I do for a living? I try to keep living. What keeps me living? Music. It is truly the elixir of youth. Naturally, I'm a DJ.
Where do you usually DJ at?
For my compatriots at the Shady Acres Retirement Facility. Once I received their raving reviews, I went on to unleash my talents upon the townspeople here in Midlands.
Have you ever DJ'd at a winery named Peony Estates here in Midlands?
I have. Their resident DJ, Crazy Legs, is one of my oldest and greatest friends. But once her legs truly went crazy, it seemed it was now her time at Shady Acres and mine at Peony. How the tables do turn, Mr. Owens.
So when exactly did you DJ for Peony Estates?
The 17th and 30th of May, and then the 7th of June, all in 2019.
Well, I want to start by talking about that May 30th gig then. What kind of event were you DJing?
Awake. I actually knew the fellow.
Did you happen to see the defendant that day?
I did. I saw Harper speaking to a man who not only loves death, but profits off of it, the wake coordinator. She was asking questions about planning a funeral.
What exactly did you hear the defendant say?
After the coordinator asked if there was a funeral soon, Harper said, "Not yet, but it's good to know your options." Fair enough.
Is that the only time you saw the defendant on May 30th?
No, I later discovered her in her office, writing something.
Did you get the chance to see what she was writing?
Yes, 'twas a note.
Would you recognize a photo of that note here in court?
I believe I would.
Your Honor, let the record reflect we're displaying Exhibit 24 for authentication by the witness outside the purview of the jury.
All right, this is not being shown to the jury, just defense counsel, plaintiff's counsel, and the witness. You may proceed.
Ma'am, what are we looking at here?
What we have here, Mr. Owens, is that note I saw Harper writing.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of that note?
It is.
Plaintiff offers Exhibit 24.
Any objections from the defense?
Without objection, Your Honor, as this is an admission by their party opponent.
With that, Exhibit 24 is entered. It can now be shown to the jury.
Yes, Your Honor. So, Ms. Dzhokhar, what does this note you saw the defendant write say?
It reads, "Genesis, it has come to this. The wedding can't happen. I need you out of our lives. Leave Casey, and the enclosed $300,000 is yours. Otherwise, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Don't make it come to that. You have till the 7th. Choose wisely, HM."
Now, was this note the only thing you saw the defendant write?
No, I actually saw the check for $300,000.
So did you get the chance to speak to the defendant after seeing that note in that check?
Yes, that's actually when she started gloating, telling me about her luxurious retirement plans, saying she had offspring. Casey, whom she wanted to take over the winery. Must be nice.
Well, did the two of you talk about Genesis at all?
I asked what Casey's future spouse thought of that, and she said Genesis won't go for that, but I've got a plan. As ludicrous as it all sounded, I was approaching my curfew at Shady Acres, so I bid her adieu.
Well, then I want to jump forward and talk about that June 7th gig. What event was it that time?
The wedding rehearsal. It was amazing. Some of my best work. Genesis was, as the children say, throwing it down. We put on a really great show. Everyone seemed to be enjoying it, except Harper.
What do you mean?
I mean, while everyone, myself included, was indulging in our youth, Harper was standing off to the side, glaring at Genesis. I could see her wrinkles deepening in real time.
Well, did you actually see the defendant do anything?
Eventually, she walked towards the building with the bottling area.
What did you do?
I needed Harper to sign a form from Shady Acres so that I could be out past curfew. So I went to find her in that building.
What did you find?
What I found, Mr. Owens, was myself in a maze. I was very confused, and even more confusing. Once I was in the bottling area, there was but a single bottle of wine.
Do you remember anything about that bottle?
I do. It said Cara 2019. It was uncorked, and there was wine in it.
Now, is that the only time you saw that bottle?
No. After aimlessly wandering around looking for Harper, I eventually found myself back in that same room, where I saw Harper holding that bottle.
Was there anything different about it now?
Now it was corked.
Do you know if the defendant saw you in that room?
She looked actually quite startled to see me. She said she thought she saw a ghost, and while my foundation may have been a bit heavy-handed that day, there was no reason to be rude.
Or did the defendant actually do anything?
She kicked something under the table and ushered me out of the room.
So when was the next time you saw that bottle of Cara wine?
The next time I saw it was later that night when Harper gifted it to Genesis.
Now, did you see Genesis drink any of that wine?
Sure, Genesis drank a glass as soon as he got it.
Did you drink any of that wine?
I'll admit, I did try to, but Harper stopped me, led me to the cocktail station instead.
After the defendant stopped you from drinking that wine, did you ever see that bottle of Cara again?
The last time I saw that bottle was the next morning. Harper was carrying it with his gloves on like it was a dirty diaper. She took it over to the furthest dumpster and tossed it. I never saw it again.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Dzhokhar. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Certainly. Any cross from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Dzhokhar, you just gave a pretty detailed account of the June 7th weekend, but I want to be clear with the members of the jury. Mr. Owens actually interviewed you about this case in July of 2020, right?
No, my dear.
Is it your testimony you weren't interviewed about this case in July of 2020?
I was contacted by the plaintiff, but Mr. Owens here, not this guy, no.
Well, you were interviewed by attorneys in July of 2020 about this case, weren't you?
Yes, just not that bloke.
Absolutely. And when you were interviewed in July of 2020, you didn't tell the attorneys anything that you just testified to.
Right. At the time, all I knew was that Genesis had died, and honestly, I didn't think I'd seen anything of value.
In fact, that's what you told those attorneys and law enforcement, was that you didn't know anything about this case, right?
Precisely.
Then you spent a couple months watching this case play out in the media, right?
Well, my grandson Marcus told me it's all over the news.
That's right, you spent 7 months watching what the news had to say about Miss Martini.
I suppose.
And after those 7 months of watching this trial play out in the media, that's when you suddenly had this information to testify to, right?
So essentially what happened, Miss Branham, I apologize if I'm saying it wrong. Once it was on the telly and I realized it was about Genesis who may have been poisoned with pesticide from wine. That's when I realized, okay, maybe I've seen something of relevance.
Okay, Miss Dzhokhar, so you realized maybe you had seen something relevant.
Right.
You didn't take that to law enforcement though, did you?
I'm sorry, can you come again? I didn't catch that.
That information you realized you had, you didn't take that to law enforcement.
I took it straight to the people.
That's right, you didn't take it to the attorneys that had interviewed you before, right?
Well, eventually I did. I'm here, aren't I?
The first place you took that information was to a talk show, right, Miss Dzhokhar?
Right, straight to the people. The news.
Because you wanted to boost your career, isn't that correct?
Well, I wanted to get the word out there that I had information. I felt compelled to tell what I'd seen.
And after you got the word out there, after you told your story on that talk show, your career started to benefit, right?
Oh, yes. So my grandson Marcus says the views and hits for DJ Golden Girl have gone through the roof.
Well, you've gained thousands of new subscribers, right?
That's what I'm told.
Your music has received record-breaking downloads, right?
Yes. Marcus tells me I'm the next Kanye.
And Miss Dzhokhar, now you're telling that same story that you told on that talk show in court today.
Right. I'm telling exactly the same thing, all I know.
Because you know just how many people are going to see this trial.
No.
Well, you know how highly publicized it is in the media, right, Miss Dzhokhar?
Well, I know we're on Zoom right now, but I don't quite know how it works if it goes right on the telly.
Well, if you'll take a look in the top left-hand corner of your screen, ma'am, you know that you're being broadcast live right now.
Oh my God.
Just like you were on that talk show, right?
I bet you Marcus is watching right now. Marcus, I love you.
Miss Dzhokhar, you see that you're being recorded too.
Yes, you appear to be right.
You're hoping that your testimony today is going to do for your career what going on that talk show did, right?
I think that'd be great.
Thank you, Miss Dzhokhar. I have nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Owens, any redirect?
No, Your Honor, nothing from this bloke. With your permission, the witness can be excused.
Thank you, Miss Dzhokhar. Good luck with your DJing.
Thank you so much.
With that, we're going to roll right along to plaintiff's third witness, if there is one.
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Dr. Jimin Kwon.
Dr. Kwon, I see you there. There we go. All righty.
Good evening. Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Hello, my name is Dr. Jimin Kwon.
What do you do for a living?
I've been the chief emergency physician over at River Valley Hospital since 2015.
What are your responsibilities as chief emergency physician?
It's my job to quickly and accurately diagnose patients who enter the emergency room. This means that I order tests, make diagnoses, and decide on courses of treatment.
How did you get into that line of work?
Well, I got my Bachelor of Science in Biology with a minor in chemistry at Georgia Tech, and then I got my medical degree at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
What did you do after that?
I did my residency and fellowship at Emory in emergency medicine and medical toxicology, respectively. I also serve on the board of doctors for Organic Solutions.
Dr. Kwon, can you tell us why you're here today?
I was Genesis Petrio's treating physician on June 8th, 2019, and I'm here today to talk about what caused his death.
Did you have sufficient facts and data to form a conclusion on the cause of death?
Yes, I did. In addition to my firsthand examination of him, I had access to the affidavit of Angel Rodriguez and tests of Mr. Petrillo's blood and vomit samples.
Did you use reliable principles and methods in coming to your conclusions?
Yes, I performed a standard emergency room examination of Mr. Petrillo. It's the same process I learned from my mentor, Dr. G.T. Sievert, and the same one used by most emergency room doctors in the country when they receive a patient in Mr. Petrillo's condition. It's the gold standard in my field.
Did you reliably apply this method to the facts of today's case?
Of course.
Before we get to your conclusions, let's start from the beginning. How did Mr. Petrillo become your patient?
I was the one to examine him in the emergency room.
How did you proceed?
I admitted him into the hospital so that I could start treating him, and then I followed standard procedure. I took Mr. Petrillo's vitals, evaluated his initial symptoms, and examined samples of his vomit.
What were those initial symptoms?
He had some nausea and vomiting, as well as contracted pupils and slowed breathing.
Was there anything that his symptoms were consistent with?
Well, symptoms like nausea and vomiting can be consistent with a lot of things. One of these things is alcohol poisoning, but another is organophosphate poisoning, which also accounted for the rest of his symptoms that I observed.
Objection, Your Honor, to cumulative. If I may explain.
No standing objections. What is your response to cumulative?
Your Honor, this is absolutely not cumulative, substantially more cumulative than it is probative. Your Honor, in a case like this, where the members of the jury have to decide how and why Mr. Petrillo got poisoned, it's important for them to understand the science surrounding his death. That high probative value isn't outweighed by any cumulative value.
All right, defense, what is your response?
Yes, Your Honor. As you recall, prior to trial today, both parties stipulated that Genesis Petrillo's cause of death was organophosphate pesticide poisoning from that 2019 Carl wine. Therefore, having this expert rehash those conclusions when that stipulation is going to be read to the jury at the conclusion of today's trial, it's a needless waste of the court's time, Your Honor. And so it's cumulative.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Briefly, yes.
Your Honor, it's critical for the members of the jury to hear exactly how and why Mr. Petrillo passed away in today's case, for them to make a determination on whether this was an accidental contamination or a purposeful poisoning.
While I see your point, defense counsel, I'm going to overrule that objection. It has not reached the level of needlessly cumulative, as there is clear probative value. Please proceed.
Yes, Your Honor.
Honor. Dr. Kwon, what is an organophosphate?
It's a chemical compound commonly found in pesticides. Organophosphates are very dangerous, and if you've had even a small amount, it could be deadly.
Did you try to see if Mr. Petrillo had been poisoned by pesticides?
Of course. In addition to the standard toxicology report, I ordered a poisons and toxins analysis so that I could confirm the presence of organophosphate and also to look for low levels of an enzyme called acetylcholinesterase. This is a telltale marker of organophosphate poisoning.
That poisons and toxins analysis you ordered, is that standard for suspected poisoning cases?
Absolutely. It lets us determine conclusively if someone was poisoned and what might have poisoned them.
Would you recognize this analysis if you saw it in court today?
Yes, of course.
Your Honor, let the record reflect that we're displaying Exhibit 6 on the screen.
As this has already been admitted into evidence, the jury may see it.
Doctor, do you recognize what's on the screen?
Yes, this is the specific poisons and toxins analysis I ordered to test for the presence of pesticides in Mr. Petrillo's blood and stomach contents.
What does this analysis tell us?
Both samples that were tested positive for organophosphate pesticide.
Does this analysis tell us how much pesticide was in Mr. Petrillo's system?
Because of a process called rapid hydrolysis, that's a value that we can actually run a test for. So that's why we don't see a number here on this test.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. You can take that down. Doctor, what is rapid hydrolysis?
I actually have to explain this to first-year residents all the time, and I like to do it using models. If you don't mind, can I show you using those?
Sure. Show us what you're talking about.
Now, I know this looks and sounds really silly, but I find that models really help me and my first-year residents visualize what's going on when we can't see it for ourselves, especially when it's happening at a molecular level. And now inside the body, there's lots of different types of enzymes and proteins, etc. But right now, I just want to look at two molecules, water and isofenfos.
What happens next?
Your liver serves as a filter for chemicals in your bloodstream. So when the isofenfos enters the body, it has to pass through the liver to be filtered. The way this is done is through that rapid hydrolysis that I mentioned earlier.
And what happens after that?
Rapid hydrolysis essentially is when different chemicals bond with water. And like the name suggests, this happens rather quickly. The water helps break down the isofenfos, but since the isofenfos is really toxic, as it travels through the body, it does a lot of really bad things, like inhibiting or making it really difficult to produce acetylcholinesterase, which is necessary for the function of your nervous system.
Doctor, what does all of this mean for your analysis?
Well, after the isofenfos and water bond together, we can no longer test for a number of isofenfos individually. The isofenfos becomes like a spy, but it's no James Bond. It becomes unable to be detected by tests, but it does leave its mark on other parts of the body, like low levels of acetylcholinesterase. This means that when we see a positive isofenfos test and these low levels of acetylcholinesterase, we can be almost certain that pesticide is causing the problem.
Did you find pesticides anywhere else during your analysis?
I did. I found pesticides in the contents of his stomach. Specifically, the liquid in his stomach tested positive for pesticides. Now, this was a mixture of different liquids, but it mostly consisted of wine. I actually also reviewed a test of a wine bottle that was recovered.
Would you recognize the report from this test?
Yes, I would.
Let the record reflect that we're displaying Exhibit 10 on the screen.
As it's already been admitted, you may show it to the jury.
Doctor, do you recognize this document?
Yes, this is the test of the car wine bottle that was recovered.
What does this test tell us?
An empty bottle of wine found in a trash can on June 9th, 2019 by River Valley PD tested positive for the same type of pesticide that killed Mr. Petrillo.
Does this tell us anything else about Mr. Petrillo's death?
No, it does not.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. You can take that down. So based on the toxicology reports and on your examination of Mr. Petrillo in today's case, were you able to reach a conclusion?
Yes, I was.
What is that conclusion?
I can conclude to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty that on June 7th, 2019, Mr. Petrillo ingested a liquid contaminated with organophosphate pesticide, and this contaminated liquid was the most likely cause of his death.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, Ms. Paul. Defense counsel, any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Before I proceed, Dr. Kwon, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, I can.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Certainly.
And now, Dr. Kwon, listening to your testimony just now, it sounds a lot like you and I can agree. We can agree that Genesis Petrillo died of pesticide poisoning, right?
Yes, absolutely.
We can agree that Genesis Petrillo most likely ingested those pesticides from drinking that 2019 car wine.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
And we can also agree that there are some things science can and cannot tell us.
I guess so.
You were mentioning earlier those tests, the toxicology reports that you conducted on Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents. You can't tell us how much pesticide Mr. Petrillo ingested?
No, like I said earlier, that's something that nobody can actually run a test for.
You can't tell us when those pesticides got into that 2019 car wine bottle?
No, it cannot.
You can't tell us if Peony Estates accidentally allowed that to be contaminated, or if Harper Martini put those pesticides in that bottle?
No, that wasn't my job today.
Now, nonetheless, Dr. Kwon, you and I can agree that a small amount of pesticides is certainly dangerous, like you mentioned earlier.
Yes, it can be lethal in some cases.
Right, so in some cases, small doses of pesticides could have caused the same symptoms Genesis Petrillo was experiencing.
Yes, Mr. Petrillo's symptoms were quite severe.
Now, there's one more thing we have to talk about, Dr. Kwon.
Sure.
We need to discuss your treatment of Genesis Petrillo.
Of
Genesis
course.
Petrillo was admitted into your ER At around 1 a.m., correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You performed your full examination at this time.
Yes, absolutely.
Upon completing your full examination at around 1 a.m., you noted that Genesis Petrillo was coughing,
Yes, I did.
was wheezing.
That's also correct.
You examined Genesis Petrillo's throat, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you saw that he was experiencing bronchospasms.
Yes, that's also true.
Now, just to be clear for the members of the jury, bronchospasms are what happens when the throat constricts on itself.
Yes, it's actually more the tubes in your lungs, but yes, that's correct.
And now, Dr. Kwon, at 9:27 a.m., Genesis Petrillo died of respiratory failure.
Yes, that's correct.
8 hours before, at 1 a.m., you concluded Genesis Petrillo was having trouble breathing.
Yes, that's correct.
Dr. Kwon, at no point in time did you give Genesis Petrillo an inhaler.
No, I did not. It was not standard in that case.
You say it wasn't standard, but ma'am, her throat was constricting on itself.
She was also exhibiting other symptoms at the time.
Dr. Kwon, you never gave her supplemental oxygen.
No, I do not believe so.
You never put him on a ventilator.
No, it wasn't that bad yet.
Dr. Kwon, you say he was having trouble breathing at 1 a.m. It wasn't bad enough to give him some help breathing?
Like I said, he was exhibiting other symptoms that required our attention, like the vomiting. That's something that we have to pay close attention to.
And Dr. Kwon, again, at 9:27 a.m., you concluded Genesis Petrillo died of respiratory failure.
Yes, he also had a seizure prior.
By that time, you had known for over 8 hours that Genesis Petrillo was having trouble breathing.
Yes, that's correct.
You admit you were too late in your treatment of Genesis Petrillo.
That's correct. However, Mr. Petrillo was brought to the hospital when his symptoms were extremely severe. This does leave some room for error.
Dr. Kwon, room for error. Genesis Petrillo was in your ER for 8 hours.
Yes, that's correct. And I had to explore all possible explanations so that I could get to the true cause of his death and treat accordingly.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
Certainly. Any redirect from plaintiff's counsel?
No redirect, Your Honor. We just ask that Dr. Kwon be excused.
Thank you, Dr. Kwon. You may be excused.
Thank you.
Is there anything further from the plaintiff?
No, Your Honor. With that, the plaintiff rests our case in chief and requests a 5-minute recess.
Defense, do you have any objections to a 5-minute recess?
The defense is amenable to a 5-minute recess, Your Honor. I think we're doing really well on time.
Does anybody know when all loss is? Timekeepers by chance? Okay, well, we'll take a 5-minute break. I'll figure out when all loss is. Be back if you're in Eastern time at, 5:58, 5:59-ish.
Yes, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the defense is back and ready to proceed.
Thank you very much for letting me know. May I have an affirmative from my fellow judges whether or not they're back?
Yep, I'm ready to go.
Perfect.
Ready as well.
Very good.
Yes, Your Honor, I'm ready.
Certainly. Plaintiff, is everybody here from your side?
Plaintiff's ready to go.
Is there anything we need to take up before we go into the defense's case in chief? Any motions, objections, stipulations, anything?
Nothing from the plaintiff.
Nothing from the defense, Your Honor.
Perfect. With everything in order, defense, you may begin your case in chief.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Harper Martini to the stand. May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Before I start, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am, I can.
Please introduce yourself to us.
Good evening. I'm Harper Martini.
Ms. Martini, I want to start by giving you the opportunity to address the allegations the plaintiff has made today. Did you poison Genesis Petrillo?
No, absolutely not. Look, I couldn't stand that man, but my company is more important to me than Genesis Petrillo. I would never risk its reputation because I didn't like somebody.
Well, let's talk about your business. What do you mean when you say risk its reputation?
Well, I'm the founder and owner of Peony Estates. I've built this company from the ground up and spent the better part of a decade making it the #1 winery in Midlands. It's my life's work. Poisoning Genesis with my own wine at my own winery. I mean, can you imagine how little sense that would make? It would have to be the world's dumbest business decision.
You said you couldn't stand Mr. Petrillo, but I want to be really clear for the members of the jury. What exactly was your relationship with him?
I know how bad this sounds, but we hated each other. I feel sympathetic for his family. I can't even imagine losing a child. But he had nothing good to say about my company, and he badmouthed it in front of customers. He continuously disrespected me in front of my daughter, and I felt that he was a bad influence. So yes, I hated Genesis.
Miss Martini, he was planning on marrying your daughter. How are you handling that?
Well, I wasn't happy about it, Miss Branham. And between Genesis's attitude and his debt, he wasn't exactly the type of person I hoped my only child would marry.
What do you mean his debt?
Well, every once in a while, Genesis would ask me or Casey for a few $100s here and there. So I got the impression that he wasn't the best with finances. But it wasn't until the wedding prep started that I realized quite how much debt he was in.
How did you find out about Mr. Petrillo's debt?
Well, we were meeting with our wedding planner and discussing how much the wedding was going to cost. So of course the question comes up, how are we going to pay for all of this? That's when Genesis decided to mention that he wouldn't be paying for any of the wedding. When I pressed him for details, I found out that he had $300,000 of student loan debt.
So, Miss Martini, who ultimately paid for that wedding?
Me. I had paid for and planned everything. I mean, at that point, it was clear that the kids were in way over their heads. I had to hire and work with a wedding planner, I took care of food catering service, and I hosted everything at Peony Estates.
In those months you spent planning your daughter's wedding, were you still managing your business?
Look, Casey deserved the perfect wedding. And if that meant I needed to be 120% devoted to planning it, so be it. So in those months, I'll admit, I was a little more hands-off than usual. I just handled the finances of Peony Estates, and I delegated everything else to my head winemaker.
So, Ms. Martini, can you tell us anything about what was going on with your winery during those months?
Honestly, not from an operations standpoint, no. I did have to pull some of my employees to help with the wedding during those months. So I know the 2019 wine production team was short-staffed, but that's about all I can tell you.
Ms. Martini, we've talked about how you were involved in planning your daughter's wedding as the sole financer, but how were you involved as a mother?
Well, with all the planning I had to do, I sort of had to take on a boss role during that whole process. It wasn't until the day before the wedding rehearsal that I was finally able to sit down with Casey and talk to her about my concerns with Genesis.
And how did that conversation go?
It was eye-opening. It wasn't until that conversation that I realized how much of a toll my arguments with Genesis were having on my daughter. I mean, to me, all that back and forth with Genesis was just petty. It didn't keep me up at night. But Casey's a lot more sensitive than I am. I knew I needed to make it up to her.
How did you try to make it up to your daughter?
Well, the next day at her rehearsal dinner, I gave Genesis a bottle of one of our newest wines, Cara. I knew it wouldn't mean much to Genesis because he had said plenty of times that he didn't even like my wine, but I thought it would mean a lot to Casey. When I gave my toast that night, I handed Genesis the bottle, but I was looking at Casey the whole time.
At this time, Your Honor, permission to display Exhibits 2A and 2B to the members of the jury, which have been previously entered into evidence prior to trial.
Certainly, you may show the jury.
Ms. Martini, is this the wine bottle that you gave to Mr. Petrillo on June 7th?
It is. That's the 2019 Cara wine. Because Peony Estates is a family business, I thought it would be a good gift to symbolize me welcoming Genesis into our family.
And Ms. Martini, I just want to be very clear. Did you give Mr. Petrillo this bottle of wine in secret?
No. Like I said, I gave it to him at the rehearsal dinner in front of all of our guests. I had no reason to make it a secret.
Ms. Martini, when you gave this bottle of Cara wine to Genesis Petrillo, did you know that it had your winery's pesticides in it?
Absolutely not. I mean, he was sitting at the same table as my daughter. I still have no idea how that happened. Like I was saying before, I was completely hands-off in our wine production in those months. You'd have to ask my head winemaker, Austin Lewis, about how that happened.
Just to be very clear with the members of this jury, did you ever put pesticides into your wine bottle that you gave to Mr. Petrillo?
No, I would never do something like that. I mean, that wine bottle was meant to be a gift, not a murder weapon.
Ms. Martini, there's one more thing that we need to talk about. Do you remember writing a letter to Mr. Petrillo prior to June 7th of 2019?
Yes, I do.
Would you recognize it if I showed it to you in court today?
Yes, ma'am, I would.
Your Honor, permission to display Exhibit 24, which has been entered into evidence prior to this witness's testimony.
You may show the witness and the jury this exhibit.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Martini, is this that letter that you wrote to Mr. Petrillo?
Yes, ma'am, it is.
Can you explain to us why you wrote this letter?
Of course. I was worried about the $300,000 of debt that Genesis was in. Casey's been hurt before by people just being after her for her money, so Genesis's debt made me suspicious. I knew that the moment he walked down the aisle and married my daughter, Casey would take on all of that debt too. So in my blunt manner, I asked Genesis to walk away with this letter. I didn't want my daughter to lose her family heirlooms, her home, her assets, and then be left heartbroken once Genesis got what he wanted and left.
Ms. Martini, what were you going to do if Mr. Petrillo chose not to walk away?
Well, honestly, nothing. It was a test. In this letter, I threatened to take him out of the picture the hard way by telling Casey about all the debt that he was in. But really, I just wanted to see where his priorities were. If he left with the money, we would know that he was just marrying my daughter to pay off his debts. But if he stayed, I would know that he was marrying my daughter because he actually loved her.
Thank you, Ms. Martini. I have nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Any cross-examination from the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Ms. Martini, in June of 2019, your only child was getting married.
Yes, she was.
She was getting married to somebody you hated.
Yes, like I said before, Genesis and I did not see eye to eye.
In fact, ma'am, you actually believed Genesis was going to take Casey and move across the ocean to France.
Well, that's what Genesis said, yes, not that they'd be able to stay there for very long. Casey doesn't even speak French.
Well, Miss Martini, having Casey run your winery one day is one of your biggest dreams.
Yes, sir, but unfortunately, it's mostly just that, a dream. My daughter is wonderful and she's many things, but a businesswoman is not one of them. She's made it clear that she has no intentions of taking over Peony Estates, although I've tried to convince her over the years.
Well, ma'am, you know that if Genesis and Casey moved off to France and didn't come back, There was no chance that dream was coming true.
If they stayed there, sure, but even if Casey was here, she had no intention of taking over my company anyways.
Now, ma'am, you told us on direct examination about how you wrote that note and gave it to Genesis, right?
Right.
I want to talk about that note a little bit. Your Honor, I'm going to display Exhibit 24 on the screen, which has already been admitted into evidence.
Certainly.
Ma'am, you wrote this note and gave it to Genesis, right?
Yes, I did.
Now, I want to be clear about this. You've been here for all of trial today, right?
Yes, sir, I have.
You were here when your defense attorneys asked your daughter if you offered $20,000 to support her wedding.
Sir, I paid more than $20,000 for her wedding.
Ma'am, is it your testimony that your counsel didn't ask Casey if you spent $22,000 on that wedding?
You said $20,000. I said we spent more than $20,000 on the wedding, so yes.
Ma'am, we can agree you offered Genesis over 10 times that amount of money.
Yes, like I said, this was a test to see if he was just marrying my daughter to pay off his student loans. How one manages to become $300,000 in debt for an art history degree is a whole nother question, but those are the amount of his loans.
Well, actually, ma'am, you would say you offered that bribe to pay Genesis off.
Yes, sir. I mean, were you listening when I was talking before? I was worried that this man was after my daughter for her trust fund. I didn't want him to come and marry her just to pay off his loans and then leave. I figured that if he was after her for her money, this would be the only way to find out. And if he was just after her money, he'd be better off without her.
Ma'am, that's a yes to my question. You were trying to pay Genesis off to leave your daughter.
If he was after her for her money, absolutely.
Now, you also told Genesis if he didn't accept that money, you were going to take him out of the picture the hard way.
Correct. I threatened to tell Casey about the debt, but of course, he called my bluff. He stayed. I realized that he was there because he loved my daughter.
You're telling us the hard way that had nothing to do with poisoning Genesis?
Absolutely not, sir. This letter doesn't say anything about poisoning someone.
But it does say Genesis had till the 7th.
That's right. And on the 7th, he gave the letter back to me. I realized that he was there because he wanted to marry my daughter because he loved her. I mean, I even let him keep the money. I figured that if they were going to get married, they might as well start their married life debt-free.
Ma'am, that's a yes to my question. You said you gave him till the 7th.
Yes, sir, that's right. And on the 7th, when he gave it back to me, I realized that he was there because he wanted to marry my daughter, that he loved her.
Ma'am, June 7th is the exact same day you gave Genesis that car of wine.
Yes, sir, at their rehearsal dinner.
It's the exact same night Genesis got sick.
Yes, sir.
So let's talk about what happened that morning. On the morning of June 7th, you and Genesis got into another one of your arguments about that bribe.
Yes, sir, that's right.
I actually wrote down what you said on direct examination. You said you thought your arguments with Genesis were just petty. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Ma'am, after that argument, you had the thought that you wanted nothing more than for Genesis to disappear.
Yes, sir, I didn't need him pestering me in my office when I was trying to figure out the table charts for that night. I mean, I was trying to plan an entire wedding, and he was bugging me. I needed him to be out of the room.
Miss Martini, less than 24 hours before Genesis died, the thought crossed your mind that you wanted him gone.
Sir, gone from my office, not from the face of the earth.
Well, you'd agree with me, Miss Martini. You thought in an ideal world you would find a way to make Genesis disappear from your life forever.
Sure, that would be ideal. Like I said, I didn't want him marrying my daughter. But let me be clear, sir, I didn't want him to die, much less at my winery. I mean, this has been a PR nightmare for my business.
I want to be clear about this, ma'am. When you handed Genesis that bottle of wine, you knew pesticides were poisonous.
Yes, sir. I didn't know that they were in that wine, though, of course. I thought he would share it with my daughter.
Ma'am, when you handed Genesis that bottle of wine, you knew pesticides were lethal.
Yes, like I said before. That's why I've always told all of my staff to be careful with them.
Nothing further.
Thank you, Counselor. Any redirect from the defense?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that Ms. Martini be able to step down.
Ms. Martini, you may step down. Defense, may you call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
Let's see. I see everybody's faces. Very good.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
You may.
Good evening, ma'am. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can.
Great. Can you introduce yourself to us?
Sure. Hello, my name is Blair Osborne.
Where are you from, Miss Osborne?
Well, I'm from Brooklyn. If you've ever been there, I'm sorry. If you ever want to go there, I'm also sorry.
What do you do for a living?
Well, I own an event planning business called Bliss by Blair Events. Over the past 10 years, I've made my clients happier than a college student getting their stimulus check.
Well, how are you involved in this case?
Well, a longtime client of mine, Harper Martini, she contacted me to plan the wedding for her daughter, Casey Soto, and her fiance, Genesis Petrillo. We decided to plan the wedding at Harper's business, Peony Estates.
So the bride and the groom, were they involved in the wedding planning process?
Yes, they were. God bless them. Once Genesis and Casey got involved, it was nothing but arguing between the groom and Harper. I don't know if this comes as a surprise to anyone, but Harper and Genesis did not get along. You know what they say about strong personalities butting heads with each other.
Ma'am, what do they say?
Oh, I don't know. I figured you knew.
Okay, Miss Osborne, but what would Miss Martini and Mr. Petrillo argue about?
Oh, well, they argued about anything. I mean, flower arrangements, tablecloths, the flavor of the cake. One time, I heard Genesis say that Harper got her shoes from Payless.
These arguments they got into, did they sound intense to you?
Oh, God, no. I mean, I've heard far worse. Listen, I was the one that planned Carol Baskin's first wedding. That whole situation made the beef between Harper and Genesis look like a kindergarten slapping contest.
And were you paid by Harper Martini for your planning of this one?
Absolutely, I was. By the end of the wedding, Harper dished out over $22,000. I mean, there were times that I would think, maybe Harper should go with the more affordable option here. But Harper, she wasn't taking this one lightly. She insisted on the most expensive option for her daughter.
Well, I want to move on to the week of that wedding. Were you at the rehearsal dinner on June 7th of 2019?
Yes, sir, I was.
And did you see anything important there?
Well, my assistant Deandra broke the heel of her stilettos and left the wedding venue weeping. The priest fell asleep right at the front of the altar. May he rest peacefully. But the real highlight of the evening was definitely the toast that Harper gave to Genesis.
Ma'am, I want you to focus on that toast. Why'd you call it a highlight?
Oh, Harper gave Genesis this beautiful bottle of Peony Estates wine. She gave her this whole speech too. She got up in front of everyone, gave Genesis the wedding gift, and well, I watched her pour a glass of it for Genesis in front of everybody.
And the toast that she gave, did it sound genuine to you?
Yeah, Harper's speech was very moving. Everyone in the audience was shedding tears. I mean, I haven't cried that much since I caught my husband cheating on me with my assistant Deandra.
Moving on from that, ma'am. Did the rehearsal dinner end after those toasts?
The divorce is going great, thank you for asking. But to answer your question, yes, at around midnight, everybody seemed to be heading off to bed. I decided I would get my beauty sleep for the wedding the next morning.
Were you at Peony Estates the next morning?
I was. At around 8 o'clock, I was helping Harper set up for the wedding when Angel Rodriguez, she pulled up looking messier than I was when I walked in on my husband and Deandra. She told me that Genesis was in the hospital, and we found out later that Genesis had passed away.
Miss Osborne, I want you to be clear for the members of this jury. Did you ever see Miss Martini put pesticides in the bottle of wine that you saw her give to Mr. Petrillo?
No, I never saw anything like that.
Thank you for your time, Miss Osborne. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Counselor. Any cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Osborne. I just have a couple more questions for you and then we'll get you out of here, all right?
Sure thing. Ask away.
Now, you've actually worked with Peony Estates for some years now, right?
Yes, I have. I'm proud to say I've done 83 events at Peony Estates.
Right, like you told us on direct examination, they're actually a longtime client of yours.
Yes, they are.
In that time, you'd say that you've gotten to know the defendant, Harper Martini, pretty well, right?
Yes, we have a very good professional relationship, as I do with all of my clients.
In fact, ma'am, when the defendant asked you to plan Casey's wedding, you jumped on that opportunity.
Of course I did.
Because you thought that planning an event for this defendant was like planning an event for family, right?
Well, I like to think of all my clients as one big family of mine. Yes, sir.
Well, you're aware that she's on trial today, right?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And there's nothing that anyone can show you to convince you that she's liable. True.
Well, I certainly don't believe that Miss Martini would do something to hurt her daughter like this.
Well, ma'am, I want to talk about some things you didn't mention about her on direct examination. When you were planning that wedding, you actually had plenty of conversations with the defendant, right?
Of course I did. I mean, it was planning a wedding. I'm not a mind reader. I don't know what people want at their weddings.
Well, ma'am, some of those conversations were actually about Genesis Petrillo.
They were, yes.
In one of those conversations, the defendant said, one of these days, Genesis will drink the wrong thing, right?
Yes, that was after something that Genesis had sent. She sounded very drunk.
The defendant said, drinking the wrong thing will kill Genesis. True.
Yes, like I said, this was after a conversation where Genesis had sounded incredibly intoxicated. Look, I'm a wedding planner. It's definitely within my ability to tell when people are drunk.
Ma'am, I'm just asking you what the defendant said. She said drinking the wrong thing will kill Genesis.
Yes, sir.
You were at that rehearsal dinner on June 7th, weren't you?
Of course I was. I'm not going to leave wedding planning to anybody but myself.
And at that rehearsal dinner, you saw the defendant give Genesis that bottle of wine.
I did. It was a very beautiful moment.
When she gave him that bottle, she didn't tell him to share it with the crowd, did she?
No, I don't believe so.
What the defendant told Genesis is that that bottle was just for him.
I don't believe that I heard her say that exact thing. Again, I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the presentation of the bottle. I was dealing with tons of other things at the moment.
Ma'am, you heard the defendant say that that bottle was for him to reflect on everything he'd done. True?
Yes. During that speech, she was talking about all the things that Genesis did to make Casey happy.
That's a yes to my question. You saw the defendant. You heard the defendant say that that bottle was for Genesis to reflect on everything he'd done, right?
Again, yes, sir.
Then you saw the defendant pour Genesis a glass of that wine.
I did.
And you know that Genesis passed away the next morning, right?
Unfortunately, yes, that's true. I did find that out the next day.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Your Honor, I have nothing further at this time.
Thank you, Counselor. Defense, do you have any redirect?
Briefly, Your Honor.
I'll hold you to that.
May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Miss Osborne, when Miss Martini gave that bottle of wine to Mr. Petrillo, was she in front of a crowd?
Oh, yeah, she was in front of the entire wedding party.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
True to your word. I like it. All righty. Thank you, Miss Osborne. Or actually, any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
With that, Miss Osborne, you may be dismissed. Defense, you may call your next witness, if any.
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Austin Lewis to the stand. And while the witness is getting set up, Your Honor, I'm having a bit of a Wi-Fi issue on my end. So if I ever cut out, please just let me know and I'll repeat my question.
Certainly. Right now, it looks like you have full bars on my screen, but if you have any technical problems, please do let me know.
Excellent, Your Honor. And before I begin, Ms. Lewis, can you see and hear me all right?
Yes, sir. Can you see and hear me?
I can. May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Good evening, Ms. Lewis. Could you please introduce yourself to us?
Yes, sir. Good evening, everyone. My name is Austin Lewis.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Lewis?
Well, currently I'm the head winemaker at Peony Estates Winery.
And how are you involved in this case?
I'm aware that Mr. Petrio's family is claiming that Harper Martini poisoned my company's wine. I'm just here to make sure that Peony Estates is not caught up in any of these allegations.
Ms. Lewis, you say your company. Do you own Peony Estates?
I only own about a 10% stock, but I've been with Peony Estates since the day its doors opened. My boss, Harper Martini, is the owner and proprietor of Peony Estates, and she's still on the Zoom call, right? I just want to make sure she's watching.
Yes, ma'am. Is that going to be an issue for you?
No, sir, not at all. Regardless, I'm positive that nobody will be able to tie my company's wine back to anything that happened to Mr. Petrio, unfortunately.
All right, Ms. Lewis. And I want to talk to you about the production of that 2019 car wine you just brought up. Can you walk us through the production of that wine?
Sure. So we planted the seeds for the car wine in 2017 and then harvested them in August of 2018. After we harvested those grapes, we left them to ferment in the wine cellar for just a couple of months to taste before we began the bottling process.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm sharing my screen of Exhibit 4. It's been pre-admitted pursuant to Stipulation 3.
All right, you may show that to the jury.
Ms. Lewis, do you recognize what I'm showing you?
Yes, sir. This is a map of Peony Estates.
Can you explain to the jury how Peony Estates usually harvests its grapes?
So our winery is right next to a swamp, and because we've dealt with many pest infestations in our grapes, we use pesticides to deter those pests. Peony Estates is also on a wide slope, so when we spray those pesticides, the pesticides accumulate more so in the bottom ditch of the vineyard. Because of this, every year we throw away those grapes at the bottom in order to weed out any possible contamination.
How, if at all, did throwing away these bottom vineyard grapes affect Peony Estates' profits?
Unfortunately, every year we sacrifice about a fifth of our profits, so 20%, by disposing of the grapes at the bottom of the vineyard. And we do this just to ensure the safety of our customers. We really don't want anybody getting sick.
Can you tell the members of the jury how, if at all, your employees reacted to throwing away all these grapes?
Sir, why do you ask?
I'll rephrase my question, Ms. Lewis. Would you recall sending out a company memo in around July of 2018?
I do.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to share my screen of Exhibit 12. It's not entered into evidence yet, so it's constructively outside the ears of the jury.
Certainly. So it's just going to be shown to myself, plaintiff's counsel, defense counsel, and Ms. Lewis.
Yes, Your Honor, just for identification purposes.
Certainly.
Ms. Lewis, do you recognize what I'm showing you?
Yes, sir. This is that memo.
Is it a fair and accurate representation of that memo?
Yes, sir. I wrote this the very same day I sent it out to all of our employees.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, it hasn't.
And was this document kept in the regular course of Peony Estates' business activity?
It was. We send out memos just like these on the very first of every month.
As the head winemaker and the author of this memo, are you the individual that keeps this memo on file?
Well, yes, by law, the DHES requires me to do so.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense offers Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objections?
No objection, Your Honor.
Hearing no objection, this is so admitted.
Ms. Lewis, can you tell us why you sent out this memo?
I mean, we were having a pretty rough year financially. We were having to throw away cask after cask of wine, and that meant throwing away our money. The less money we have, the more layoffs we'll need, of course. So I wrote this with the intention of telling my employees that we needed to step up our pesticide spraying, or else they would be fired.
Can you tell us if your employees reacted to the possibility of layoffs?
Mr. Izquierdo, Peony Estates employees complied with all health and safety protocols for pesticide spraying at the premises.
Let me rephrase, Ms. Lewis. Can you tell us if your employees reacted to throwing away all of those bottom vineyard grapes?
Yes, and they didn't sound too happy when I spoke with them. All right, is that what you want me to say? Here I am telling them that we literally cannot afford to employ them all. And in the same sentence, I'm telling them that we have to keep throwing away a fifth of the money we could use to feed their families, Mr. Izquierdo.
Well, did you oversee that grape harvest in 2018?
Well, no, I had a family emergency and I had to leave town.
Since you weren't at Peony Estates during that harvest, can you even tell us if your employees followed your instructions and threw out those grapes?
Personally, I was not there, so I didn't have eyes on them the whole time. So I suppose to answer your question, no, but I trusted my men to do what I told them to do, of course.
All right, Ms. Lewis, let's move on to where that wine was kept and bottled. Did Peony Estates ever spray pesticides in its bottling area?
Yes, sir, there were pests every time we sprayed. That's what we needed to do, obviously.
Did you ever spray pesticides in the same room as that 2019 car wine?
Mr. Izquierdo, if this is about that FDA citation, we were caught at a bad time. And I tried to tell the FDA inspector that, but every time I tried to speak with her, she would just put her hand up and cut me off.
Objection, Your Honor, to relevance, if I may be heard.
No. Defense, what is your response to relevance?
Yes, Your Honor. If I can actually share my screen of a pretrial order that was issued prior to trial today.
You may. Which pretrial order are you referencing?
It's the September 29th, 2020 pretrial order from Judge Frank Gugliuzza, excuse me. It's that second paragraph. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now.
You may share your screen.
Your Honor, I'm enlarging this paragraph right here. It states that evidence of Peony Estates' pesticide usage and or storage may be admitted by either party because such evidence is relevant to the issue such as intent or causation. We're actually offering Peony Estates' storage practices during the time of that 2019 car wine production to rebut the plaintiff's theory of causation in this case, being that Harper Martini was the one that put pesticides into that wine.
Okay, plaintiff, your response?
Your Honor, while Peony Estates' pesticide storage and usage is relevant insofar as causation or intent, that order specifically states that they cannot use actions such as a citation to prove that Peony Estates violated any building codes or health codes. Your Honor, evidence of a citation doesn't prove causation, therefore it's irrelevant.
Response on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
That pretrial order actually does not mention FDA at all. It mentions the Midlands Building Code. That's a completely separate state statute. We're talking about the FDA federal guidelines here. It doesn't have any bearing on the FDA guidelines. And certainly this testimony is relevant to disputing causation.
Response on those grounds, Your Honor?
Yes.
Opposing counsel and the witness did not clarify whether these were regulations of the FDA or the building code. Now, evidence of citations goes directly towards that building code 12100 and goes towards proving that Peony Estates was negligent in today's case, not any kind of intent nor causation. Therefore, it's irrelevant.
Defense, do you have anything else?
Once again, Your Honor, that pretrial order has no bearing on the FDA citations that Peony Estates received. And we're offering this testimony to show Peony Estates' practices at the time that it was producing the 2019 car wine Genesis Patrio drank. Relevance is certainly a low bar, Your Honor, and an FDA citation regarding the wine that Genesis Patrio, the decedent in this case, drank is certainly relevant, Your Honor.
Okay. Looking at the wording of this order, I see nothing prohibiting discussing the FDA. As such, I'm going to overrule the objection and allow you to continue.
Ms. Lewis, what was Peony Estates doing during the time they received this FDA citation?
In May of 2019, we were bottling the 2019 car wine. But at the same time, we were also dealing with a bug infestation in our bottling room. So we moved all of our pesticides into the bottling area, but that's it. That is all that happened.
Ms. Lewis, are you familiar with FDA guidelines?
Well, yes, we have to do regular training as part of people who have liquor licenses in order to create and distribute.
Was the 2019 car wine still in the same room when you brought those pesticides in?
Yes, it was.
Did you plastic wrap any of the equipment or those wine casks before bringing in those pesticides?
We were in the process of doing so. We knew that we had to, so we were getting ready to do it, but when we brought the pesticides in, we had not done that yet.
Did Peony Estates spray its premises in anticipation for the June 7th wedding rehearsal?
Well, yes, sir. It was May. It was the summer. It was muggy. We're by a swamp. We did that to ensure the safety of all the people who would be at the wedding. We sprayed every corner of that estate that we could.
Ms. Lewis, is it a health code violation to have pesticides in the same room as the wine?
I would like to express that this instance does not reflect our standard business practices at Peony Estates. This only occurred because we were short-staffed and operating on razor-thin margins.
Ms. Lewis, did Peony Estates violate FDA health codes when producing the wine Genesis Petrillo drank?
Mr. Izquierdo, would you like for me to throw my company under the bus? I would lose everything. I would lose my stock options, my investment plan, 6 years of my life.
Ms. Lewis, is that a yes or a no to my question? Did Peony Estates violate FDA health codes when producing the wine Genesis Petrillo drank?
Mr. Izquierdo, all Harper Martini does is crunch numbers. I built this company. I would be the
Lewis, yes or no?
Yes, fine. Yes, Peony Estates violated FDA guidelines.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Okay, cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
Good evening, Miss Lewis.
Good evening.
I'd like to start by talking about some things you mentioned on direct examination.
By all means.
Like you told us earlier, Peony Estates is built on a slope.
Yes, ma'am.
And because it's built on that slope, pesticides gather at the bottom of it.
Yes.
Because of that, every year since 2016, you've roped off those grapes at the bottom and thrown them away.
Personally, yes, ma'am, I have. I made sure because I knew it was at stake if we wouldn't.
And on direct examination, you told us that you weren't there in 2018 to throw those bad grapes out.
Ma'am, my father died that week, so I went home, so I was not there.
I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Lewis, but I'd like to break that down for the members of the jury.
Sure.
In 2018, you did rope off those bad grapes, right?
I instructed my employees to do so and to throw them out, and I trusted them to do that.
Miss Lewis, you roped those bad grapes off.
Like I just said, and I instructed my employees to make sure that they were thrown out. I trusted them.
And there was someone else who knew that you were leaving because of your father's death.
Everybody knew I was leaving, ma'am. It was a pretty horrific incident for me. I took some time off.
So you told the defendant in today's case, the owner of Peony Estates, that you were leaving.
Yes, I instructed her to make sure that my process was carried out, and I trusted her to do that too.
And the defendant agreed to carry out that process.
Yes, ma'am, I probably should have sent her a pamphlet or some instructions. She has never stepped foot in our vineyard, let alone been involved in a bottling or spraying process.
So that's a yes. The defendant agreed to throw all those bad grapes out.
Yeah, she said yes and then waved me off.
So you expected that those bad grapes would be thrown out?
That was the hope. Yes, ma'am.
You expected that those bad grapes wouldn't end up in your wine?
Yes, ma'am. I trusted my staff to do what I asked them.
Miss Lewis, you put the safety of your wine in the hands of this defendant.
I put the safety of the wine in the staff of Peony Estates, ma'am.
I'd like to talk about how you used pesticides.
Sure.
You personally supervised every pesticide spraying at Peony Estates.
When I was able to, yes, ma'am. I tried.
You're not aware of any pesticide containers leaking?
Oh my God, I hope they weren't leaking. I have never seen anything like that personally.
You're not aware of any pesticide containers spilling?
I've never seen anything spilled.
you're not aware of any customers getting sick because of your wine.
I would know nothing about that, ma'am. That's for our HR department. They're in two separate parts of the state.
So that's a yes. You're not aware of any customers getting sick because of your wine.
Personally, no, ma'am, but I can't speak for our HR department.
Miss Lewis, at the end of the day, you don't think your wine got contaminated during the winemaking process.
I don't see how it could have, ma'am. I'm not sure of the science behind contamination or cross-contamination or anything like that. That's why I took those precautions. I have no clue how it happens.
Well, let's talk more about that. You know that Genesis Petrillo was engaged to the defendant's daughter, Casey Soto.
I'm not sure how that relates to cross-contamination, but I knew that. Yes, we planned the wedding at the winery.
You know that the defendant hated Mr. Petrillo.
Yes, ma'am. Harper is a lot of things, and a comedian is not one of them.
The defendant told you that Genesis was a bad influence on her daughter, Casey.
Yes, ma'am. She'll say the same thing about our plumber when he takes a smoke break when he's on the estate. It's the same 5 sentences over and over again.
Well, she told you that if she could push a button and make Genesis disappear, she would absolutely do it.
Yes.
Miss Lewis, you store your pesticides at Peony Estates.
Yes, ma'am.
The defendant has access to those pesticides.
Everyone has access to the pesticides, ma'am, if you're an employee at Peony Estates.
The defendant told you that pesticides could be poisonous if ingested.
Right, that we found that out during our FDA training, and I suppose this one time where one of our employees drank wine that had pesticides in it, he got sick.
The defendant told you that pesticides could be fatal.
Ma'am, that's very common knowledge, yes.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect, Your Honor.
Yes, you may.
Ms. Lewis, Harper Martini's involvement with Peony Estates was brought up on cross-examination. I want to go over that. What's Harper Martini's position in Peony Estates?
She's the owner. She sits in her office all day. She files our taxes, speaks with our business representatives, talks with our third-party salespeople. I don't care to know what she does. She works with money. I do the real work.
Does she have any involvement with the winemaking process?
No, she's never lifted a finger to help me.
You were also talking on cross-examination about an employee that had gotten sick. Can you explain that?
Yes, sir. During one of our bottling area spraying events, Mr. Doolittle, he had a glass of wine sitting out on the counter, and pesticides were sprayed down in that room. He took a sip and he got sick, had to go to the hospital, and it was pretty horrific for him, is what I understood.
So this has happened before?
Sir, I would not necessarily say that this has happened at Peony Estates before. This was merely just a employee having just an accident. That's all that was.
Would you say that accidents are pretty frequent at Peony Estates?
Well, we have accidents from time to time, like every company does, Mr. Izquierdo. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Any recross?
No recross, Your Honor.
All right, Miss Lewis, you may step down. Is there anything further from the defense?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the defense rests its case in chief, and pending a brief recess, we can move straight into closings.
Plaintiff, do you have any issue with the recess? Anything further before we start getting ready for closings?
Nothing further at this point. We're fine with a quick recess before closings.
Okay, I mean, we started at the earliest at 5, which puts all loss at 7:30, if not a little bit later. We're doing great on time. Would you all like a 10-minute recess? Is that amenable?
That'd be great
Perfectly
for the defense,
amenable.
Your Honor.
Okay, so everyone be back 6:52 Eastern.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm ready to go, Judge.
Sound. Judge Edwards?
Ready as well.
I'm ready too.
Sounds good. All right. I mean, you have another minute if you want it, but let me know if y'all are ready.
Plaintiff's ready now.
The defense is ready as well, Your Honor.
Certainly. All right. Is there anything we need to take up before going to closings?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing from the defense.
Very good. Okay. In that case, plaintiff, when you are ready.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. She was out of time. She was out of options. Members of the jury, when you just think about what the defendant did on June 7th, it probably sounds a little bit crazy. A mother so bold, she jumps to poisoning her son-in-law. That's not something any of us want to believe could happen. But when you take a step back, when you track the defendant through the weeks and months leading up to June 7th, things start to make sense. You see a defendant who was desperate. A woman thinking for days on end of some way to cancel that wedding. With each tick of the clock, with each failed attempt to get what she wanted, this defendant was running out of time and out of options. And that's why Mr. Petrio's family sued her for battery. I want to make this clear. Even though we're accusing the defendant of poisoning Genesis, we didn't put on a murder case today. I'm no government attorney, and this defendant enjoys no presumption of innocence. But what that means for you, members of the jury, is if you find it's just more likely than not that Harper poisoned that wine to hurt Genesis, and that Genesis died because of it, well, then you have to find her liable. And to see how we met that burden, I want to walk through the options the defendant had left. Because this story really begins in early May of 2019, when Casey Soto sat across the table from this defendant. Because if there's one thing any of the witnesses in this case agree on, it's that the defendant loved her daughter. Maybe too much. So when she found out Casey was going to flee across the ocean, she immediately listed off every option she could think of. Do you remember what she said? Genesis, I don't care if you stay, go to France, or end up 6 feet under, but Casey is staying here. Now, as soon as Casey told the defendant there was no way they were staying in Midlands, that was one option gone. A few weeks pass, and now the defendant's getting desperate. You learn that on May 30th, Devin Dzhokhar saw the defendant write a check for $300,000 and a threatening note right along with it. And members of the jury, the defense wants you to believe Peony Estates put profits over people. Somehow, this company was hemorrhaging so much cash, they couldn't afford to play by the rules. But Harper just happened to have $300,000 laying around to give Genesis? Members of the jury, the defendant bet $300,000 on Genesis's life and lost. Option gone. So on the exact day she said she would, she grabbed that bottle of Carl wine, picked up those pesticides, poured them in, sealed the bottle, and handed it to Genesis. And when the defendant handed that bottle to Genesis, she may as well have told the band to go home. She may as well have taken down that altar because, members of the jury, there wasn't going to be a wedding. There was going to be a funeral. When the defendant sealed that bottle of wine, she sealed Genesis's fate right along with it. And she told Genesis she would. Because when you go back to deliberate, you'll get to see the letter the defendant wrote to Genesis. Give it a look. The defendant said, Genesis, if you don't leave by the 7th, I will take you out of the picture the hard way. Now, the defense wants you to mean this was just talking about some debt. But use your common sense. Over $250,000. The kind of money some people won't touch in their entire lifetimes. If that was the easy way, then you know how terrible the hard way was. But the defense keeps telling you no. They keep telling you put all your stock in the words of this defendant, you have to trust her. But members of the jury, while the evidence does not lie, today it has shown that this defendant will. So ask yourselves, if the defendant didn't poison the Carl wine, why did she kick something under the table and usher Devin Dzhokhar out of that room? If the defendant didn't know that bottle was poison, why did she grab Devin by the shoulder and pull her away before she could take a sip? Members of the jury, if the defendant didn't poison that bottle, why did she carry it out to the dumpster wearing gloves like it was some sort of biohazard? Because it was, members of the jury. And the defendant knew it. And as much as we wish he hadn't, Genesis drank from that bottle that night. He didn't know any better. He had no idea that with each sip, the defendant was getting closer and closer to finally getting what she wanted. Now Genesis was out of time. Dr. Kwon confirmed the cause of death. Pesticide poisoning. Members of the jury, it's been almost 2 years that the Petrillo family has been searching for answers. Almost 2 years they've been fighting for justice. Now, there's nothing any of us can say that will bring Genesis back. We know that, members of the jury. But what you can do is make that next year just a little bit easier. You can hold the defendant accountable for her actions. You can find her liable. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Counselor. Closing from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, members of the jury. Profits over people. That's why we're here. We are in this courtroom today because a corporation was more focused on their own profits than they were the lives of people. They were focused on all the wrong things. But isn't it so ironic that that's exactly what we've watched the plaintiff do throughout the course of this entire trial? Because just like Peony Estates, the plaintiff has been focused on the wrong things. Instead of looking at the story the evidence has told today, the plaintiff has been more fixated on their own version of what happened here, on their own story. But that's a problem. Because when the plaintiff came into this courtroom and brought a charge of civil battery against Harper Martini, they brought with them a burden to prove every element of their charge by the greater weight of the evidence. The law is clear. It says the plaintiff can't come in here and give you a story. They can't ask you to make assumptions or leaps in logic. They have to prove every element of their charge here with evidence. So let's look at the elements the plaintiff committed to proving to you here today. They had to prove 3 things. Number 1, that Harper Martini ever had the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo at all. Number 2, that she acted on that intent. And number 3, that Genesis Petrillo's death was caused by drinking pesticide-filled wine. Members of the jury, this trial really comes down to these top 2 elements. Because this third one, Genesis Petrillo's death was caused from drinking pesticide-filled wine, we agree with the plaintiff that unfortunately, that's what happened on June 8th. We just can't agree about how those pesticides got there. So let's start with this first element the plaintiff had to prove, that Miss Martini had the intent to harm Genesis Petrillo at all. Because the way the plaintiff's been talking today, you'd think they don't have any in-laws themselves. The plaintiff is forgetting that in real life, families fight. In-laws argue. Sometimes they say they hate each other. That doesn't mean they want to harm each other, though. That's the first leap in logic the plaintiff is asking you to make here, because the only thing the evidence has shown here throughout the course of this trial, it's the same thing Miss Martini told us herself. She wasn't Genesis Petrillo's biggest fan. She wasn't thrilled that he was going to be marrying her daughter. That doesn't mean she had the intent to harm him, though. So motive and intent are parts of the plaintiff's story that come up short when we look at this like a real life family relationship. Members of the jury, that's not the only leap in logic the plaintiff has to make here. They have to make a lot of them for their story to make sense. I mean, let's look at this letter, for example. The plaintiff wants you to believe that when Miss Martini wrote the words, "I'm going to take you out of the picture the hard way," that was her threatening to harm Genesis Petrillo. But what did she tell us today? She told us that this letter was a test to see if Mr. Petrillo was in a relationship with her daughter for the right reasons. She said that taking him out of the picture the hard way meant telling her daughter about the debt that he was in. So the question becomes, how can we know that she's being truthful when she tells us that in court today? Well, we know she is because of one fact that the plaintiff is not even contesting, something that one of their witnesses actually testified to. Miss Martini wrote Mr. Petrillo a check for $300,000. She paid off every cent of his student loan debt. Why did she do that? Because her intent for June 7th, what she thought was going to happen the next day, was she believed Mr. Petrillo would walk down the aisle and marry her daughter. She didn't want her daughter to go into all that debt too, so she made sure to pay off Mr. Petrillo's. That's how we know she's telling the truth about what she meant in that letter. When it comes to motive and intent, Miss Martini had 300,000 reasons to believe Mr. Petrillo would end up marrying her daughter, whether she was thrilled about it or not. So let's move on to the second element the plaintiff had to prove here, because we know their case has come up short on motive and intent. They had to prove that Miss Martini intended to harm Genesis Petrillo by acting, by poisoning the Cara wine on June 7th. When we're talking about their burden here, they had to prove that element by the greater weight of the evidence. We know they can't do that because there's no evidence that they've presented that Miss Martini ever acted. I mean, members of the jury, think back throughout the course of this trial. How many witnesses told us they saw Miss Martini poisoning her company's own wine? Better yet, how many witnesses told us they even saw Miss Martini holding chemical pesticides at all? Members of the jury, the plaintiff's own witnesses couldn't even place Miss Martini in a room with chemical pesticides, let alone prove that she ever acted to poison wine with them. We know they've come up short here, but let's even take it a step further. Because Mr. Owens talked a lot about how Miss Martini was out of time and out of options, but if that's the truth, if she was so worried about her daughter being taken out of the country, why would she fund that trip? Why would she pay for the plane ticket when she gave Genesis Petrillo $300,000? And why on earth would she do this in such a public fashion that would implicate her business? We heard today that the plaintiff wants you to believe that she did this using her own wine that was labeled at her own winery, and that she would present it to Mr. Petrillo in a room full of hundreds of witnesses. The plaintiff agrees with us that Miss Martini cared a lot about her daughter, so then why on earth would she do this and allow that wine to go back to the table her daughter was sitting at? That doesn't make sense when we use our common sense. So what do we do? What do we do when the plaintiff's story comes up short? Well, we look at the story the evidence has been telling all along. Because today you heard that accidents were pretty common at Peony Estates. The first accident we've heard about was a grape harvest that took place in 2018. You heard that every year Peony Estates grew their grapes on a slope, and they had to section off and throw away the grapes at the bottom because they were sitting at the bottom of that slope soaked in chemical pesticides. Every year they'd throw those away to keep consumers safe, but in 2018, we heard that their employees had every financial incentive to make sure those grapes weren't thrown away. I mean, they knew that if they sectioned off and threw away those grapes, threw away 20% of their annual profits, they'd be throwing away their paychecks with them. But we didn't just hear about that grape harvest today because we heard about what happened in May of 2019. We heard that a month before Genesis Petrillo was given that Cara wine, chemical pesticides were being sprayed in the same bottling room where that Cara wine was being stored. And members of the jury, one of the most important pieces of evidence we have heard throughout the course of this trial is that Genesis Petrillo wasn't the only person to suffer because of how Peony Estates was cutting corners. We heard that one of their own employees didn't know how to handle chemical pesticides, so much so that he accidentally ingested them and ended up in the hospital. This isn't even the first time Peony Estates has messed up. We know why. Because they put profits over people. In the words of Austin Lewis, they were operating on razor-thin margins. They had to save money however they could. Nothing else mattered. But anything they saved, we know what it cost. It cost Genesis Petrillo his life. So with your verdict, I ask that you do the only thing justice demands here. Find Harper Martini not liable for civil battery. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Any rebuttal from the...
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
You may.
The defense counsel just told you an awful lot about how you should trust the defendant because she gave Genesis $300,000 to invest in his future. But members of the jury, if you look at the note the defendant wrote to Genesis, I can't help but notice that in the same sentence she offered Genesis $300,000, she said to leave Casey forever. Members of the jury, she wasn't investing in Genesis's future. She wasn't protecting her daughter. She was trying to get rid of Genesis, and that's why you can't trust her. Because Ms. Branham wants to say we're acting like we don't have any in-laws in the world. Now, members of the jury, I have some in-laws. I'm sure you do too. We fight. We bicker. But you know what they don't do, members of the jury? In-laws don't threaten to kill you. In-laws don't tell you they want to push a button and make you disappear. In-laws don't bribe you with $250,000 to leave their lives, members of the jury. But this defendant did. Find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. With that, this concludes this trial. May all